Hello there. This will blow a big hole in the UK government's net zero plans. Oh, and I also have a little conspiracy theory for you too. Well, that will not come as good news for the government, although it wasn't actually a surprise, because the latest offshore wind auction for contracts failed to attract investors. This, said developers, is because the government wasn't offering attractive enough terms, i.e. there was no money in it for investors, because the price cap on what they could charge customers for energy in the future was too low. Ed Miliband, the Labour Shadow Climate Secretary, called it an energy security disaster, adding that the government was trashing the crown jewels of the UK energy sector. While Keith Anderson, chief executive of offshore wind developer Scottish Power, said the deal did not stack up and that this was a wake-up call for government. And here was me thinking offshore wind power was meant to be dirt cheap. But it seems high inflation, higher interest rates, rising commodity costs and rising labour costs are taking their toll. So it's not so cheap now. And that might be one of the drivers behind ratcheting up onshore wind again, by trying to make out that the vast majority of the public wants to see these things scattered about their neighbourhood with all the related pylons and wires. Now what gets me is that this failed auction was signalled weeks ago. Rishi Sunak's government could have seen this coming from a mile off. As far as I can see, they set it up to fail. But why? To fill the pockets of landowners with gold as they line up onshore wind as an alternative, maybe? But the government's actions, as well as the threat of a Labour government slapping windfall taxes on everything fossil, has also scared the investors away from the North Sea. Does the government have any energy plan at all, other than to cock it up at every opportunity? Or is this the WEF-inspired establishment uniparty following the Great Reset plan to quell the populace? All we needed to do was use gas until we brought nuclear online in the form of small modular reactors. Then we wouldn't need any wind turbines or solar panels. But the nuclear decision isn't set to be made until the end of the decade. Can kicking in the extreme. The establishment has turned can kicking from an art form into a science. And this failed offshore wind power auction could put the government's emissions targets under threat, so they'll have to cut emissions elsewhere, or ditch the targets. And you know which of those this government will always choose to do, don't you? And now for a bit of a conspiracy theory. Some people argue that this rack concrete thing, which has suddenly sprung out from nowhere, is a big distraction to make us not look where we should be looking. And they say this because this whole rack concrete thing has been known about for decades. And it doesn't just affect schools, it affects hospitals, courts and prisons as well. Whole reams of the public estate. And it's just widening out. And people are saying this must be a distraction, it must be a distraction from laws they're passing. For example, we've got the Online Harms Bill, well, now the Online Safety Bill, it's been renamed. Will that take away our freedom of speech? Will we find ourselves cut down in what we can say under sanction of law? And the other one is the energy bill that's going through, which actually seems, as far as I can see, it criminalises you not being green in your own home. And I've seen the amendments that the House of Commons made to the energy bill, because the bill actually started in the House of Lords. Then it went to the Commons. Now it's gone back to the Lords with some amendments. And if they get agreed, or they do a ping pong and agree something in the end, it goes straight into royal assent. It could be royal assent very soon and become law. And then people can be criminalised or pay a fine of up to, I think it's 15,000 quid for not having a green enough home. And more laws will follow. So people are saying this rack concrete thing is all about diverting people's attention away from this
this net zero criminalisation and this online safety bill. But I'm not so sure about that. I think it might be a lot more plain than that. It may be a bit of a misdirection, but not in the way that people are thinking. Now, the government estate, all those buildings, how many of them are actually green? I bet you not many. Not as many because they've not been built recently. Their age is old. They're not going to be green. So what the government will need to do is spend hundreds of billions, if not a trillion, on upgrading all these buildings to be green. Now, if they turned round to you, the public, and said, why? What we're going to do is we're going to spend all your money on making these government buildings green. And that means all the other services have to be dropped back. We have to cut back here, cut back there. The public would go ballistic, wouldn't they? They'd really go ballistic. So they probably sent this off to the nudge unit. What do we do to get the public to agree to us spending billions on upgrading these buildings? Well, says the nudge unit, you put the fear of God into them. You tell them their children are going to be crushed by falling schools, that their hospitals are going to fall apart on their patients. Good. Now we're good to go, aren't we? So they bring out this story, and the next thing you know, they're gearing up to spend money on making all these buildings safe again with proper concrete and all the rest of it. Although they were safe last month, but suddenly they're not safe now. So they've done a good job on us, haven't they? They've convinced us to spend billions upon billions in upgrading all these buildings. And they'll keep finding this concrete wherever they go, or asbestos, whatever it be, so that they have to keep upgrading. And with all the building regulations saying they have to be green, have to have fewer parking spaces maybe, or even none at all. You just think about that, how they're going to, what's the best way of redesigning the whole of the area, a whole area, by rebuilding a hospital greenly, and then making sure all the green things, the 15-minute neighbourhood type stuff is all inbuilt. This is a big task, but it's probably the best way for them to enforce it on us. Because we're already fighting back, and one or two low traffic neighbourhood schemes have had to be pulled because they found out it diverted traffic to another one. And the reason for that is that they haven't sprung up all together in a coordinated fashion. And what's the best way to spring up everything in a coordinated fashion? Well, to tell you what they do, they just impose rebuilding on us, but they get us to demand it. We will demand that those schools are repaired, rebuilt, knocked down, or whatever it is, and the hospitals and all the government buildings to keep people safe. And that way, that'll happen all across the country. And they can start building these 15-minute neighbourhoods all in a coordinated fashion. Now, that's a conspiracy theory for you. I don't know how true that is, but, you know, giving it a lot of thought, well, I wouldn't put anything past these people. Would you?